Marvel Cosmic Invasion is finally here, and I have been having a great time with it so far, and from what I can see online, so is everybody else. I also have little doubt that tons of people on YouTube have already been recommending all the classic Marvel games to check out before and or afterwards. And fair. Marvel do have a pretty solid library of video games, on average, and games like The Punisher and the X-Men arcade game are classic video games at this point, at least in my eyes. But going through those would be kind of obvious and more than a little repetitive given the nature of the platform and all that. Repetition is great for a beat 'em up, but not so much for a YouTube list video. So with that said, here are some other beat 'em up games that you can probably try before or after going into Cosmic Invasion. X-Men Arcade is a pretty infamous Marvel game. Welcome to Die and all that. It featured 6-player co-op at the time when the standard was only 4. The art style was dead accurate to the comics, and the gameplay included a kick the shit out of them on the ground option that wasn't standard for most games of the genre. It was a lot of fun, and Cosmic Invasion is no doubt taking some influence from it. But there's another Konami beat 'em up that's also worth trying out. Metamorphic Force was released over a year after X-Men Arcade, and from what I can tell is using the same game engine. Or at least a modified version of it. This one is more of a fantasy setting as opposed to regular cape shit, and features 4-player combat maximum, 2 less than X-Men. But the game also has animal transformations for each character, so technically this one has 8 characters total? Point is, Metamorphic Force is essentially what happens when you try to make Altered Beast, but with the X-Men Arcade game engine instead. It's like a dev looked at Colossus' special attack and thought, what if Minotaur? And I genuinely hope that person got a goddamn raise.
No matter how strong the forces of evil may be, the Avengers will be there!
Let's move on to Captain America and the Avengers from Data East. It being a pretty fondly remembered Marvel beat 'em up and all that. I would almost prefer to jump into Marvel superheroes instead, given the obvious influences already apparent in Cosmic Invasion, but let's stick to the beat 'em ups for now. Even if this particular beat 'em up is also part horizontal shooter. I'd be willing to bet this is on a lot of people's games to revisit list, but for this video I wanted to focus on a few less obvious alternatives to it. First, keeping things in the comic book realm, but in the DC universe this time, the Death and Return of Superman is probably the best one-to-one comparison I can think of to Captain America and the Avengers. At least the arcade version anyway. Released on both the SNES and the Genesis, this one is also a mix of beat 'em up and shooter, but this time focusing on the original comic book run of the Superman series of the same name. Seriously, there were 2 big comic book events in my childhood years. One of them was Maximum Carnage, and the other one was the Death and Return of Superman. There's no arcade counterpart to speak of for Death and Return, but it's still a fun experience from start to finish if you can get your hands on a copy. It's honestly a good time, as long as you can suspend disbelief that fucking Superman could ever be taken down by one of these goons. It's also got 5 playable characters, which is great. The one major caveat though being Death and Return of Superman is a single player game. But if beat 'em up games with no co-op feature doesn't fly for you, there's always... I think a lot of people are somewhat familiar with Alien Storm, considering it's shown up in at least a few Genesis collections, including the Nintendo Switch Online service. But the actual arcade original is something I think not nearly as many people ever got to try out, and that's a damn shame. The original arcade version of Alien Storm contains better graphics, sound, more cutscenes, and way more obvious signs that the entire game premise is just alien Ghostbusters. Plus, like the previously mentioned 2 games, Alien Storm also has several horizontal shooter sections, and FPS segments too. It's a big step up from the Genesis port, and a great way to spend an extra half hour of your life alone or with a friend. But if there's not enough gun in any of these entries for you... Alright, I know The Punisher is going to be on a lot of people's to-play lists, especially with its inclusion in the Marvel vs. Capcom collection that released just last year. It's a damn great beat 'em up, even with the heavy inclusion of firearms in a genre typically known for hand-to-hand combat. But if you've already played it, or read about it in detail elsewhere, there are also other options to scratch that same hyper-specific itch. When it comes to underrated Capcom beat 'em ups that deserve a re-release, that conversation typically ends up in Alien vs. Predator territory. And Capcom's version of AVP would most definitely serve the needs of anyone looking for a similar beat 'em up to the Punisher in terms of guns and firepower. But what about actual violence? I mean, the Punisher, well-known sociopath that he is the star of a game that's relatively light on the red stuff, even in the arcade version. Well, at least it is compared to Capcom's other bullet-laced beat-em-up, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. This one is a 3-player co-op game with 4 total characters to choose from. It's got the same kind of firepower found in the Punisher, but with one key difference. So aside from being one of the few beat-em-ups unafraid to show what really happens when body meets rocket, it's also got plenty of automatic weapons and single-shot rifles and pistols to pick up along the way, to say nothing of the grenades and dynamite. Plus, you get all of the fun of punching a goddamn dinosaur in the face without any of the guilt of having to take the life of one. Aw, see? He was just cranky. Plus, it gives you a proper run command and running attacks, so the gameplay is a little more varied than just walk right and punch. Well, a little more varied anyway. But if you really want to fuck with weapons and heavy firepower in a beat-em-up title. Until more recent, I judged Growl based solely on its Genesis port. And that was a mistake. Like, I used to laugh about how it took the Punisher less than a minute of gameplay before pulling out a gun. But the arcade version of Growl from Taito takes less than 8 seconds before bringing out the goddamn rocket launchers. And I respect it for that. I think at its core, Growl is a battle of opposing ideologies. On one side, you have the people who believe animals deserve to be attacked, enslaved, and then sold off for profit. On the other side of the debate, you have those that think that the first group ought to be fucking murdered. Growl has weapons galore right from the word go, and the enemy count gets pretty crazy the deeper you get into it. Way more enemies on screen at once than your average beat-em-up. Seriously, the Genesis port really does not do this title any justice. If nothing else, it's the closest we've ever gotten to an Indiana Jones cross Macho Man Randy Savage beat-em-up, and it's got a pro-environmental message to boot. There's a lot to love in Growl if you can get your hands on the arcade version proper. The Genesis version? Sure. If you really want. I guess. Alright, let's close this thing out with some obvious Spider-Man titles, and hopefully some less obvious alternatives. Cosmic Invasion is clearly taking some inspiration from Marvel superheroes and War of the Gems Spider-Man, but recommending them would probably be a little redundant at this point. Same goes for Maximum Carnage, and God knows that's been covered a disproportionate amount of times on this channel already. Instead, here's a few that, if nothing else, will give you a few more valid options to try once you're done with those ones. Jim Lee's Wildcats is one that I guess you could best compare to War of the Gems or X-Men Mutant Apocalypse. It's got unique movesets for each Wildcat, and each mission and level is unique to the character as well. It's also got projectiles. I genuinely could not remember hearing any talk or hype about this game back in the day. Couldn't remember a single magazine review either. But if you can find it on a game sale, eBay, or wherever you find your used game sales these days, dude in a van, I think it's worth the look. It'll probably be cheaper than any of the Marvel stuff too. Now, I had this entry with the Spider-Man arcade game in mind for comparison, but good fucking luck getting that shit to work. Even in emulation, I haven't had a ton of luck with it, even though I do have fond memories of the arcade game as a kid. The same could be said for Bucky O'Hare, but honestly, it's a lot easier to get your hands on that one for a playthrough without a ton of lag or error messages, at least in my experience. Released by Konami, Bucky O'Hare is another licensed beat-em-up from the company, but this time around, it has a much heavier emphasis on firepower that could even put Alien Storm to shame. There is hand-to-hand combat, but like, just enough to still call itself a beat-em-up. Melee gets used in Bucky O'Hare the same way it gets used in your average FPS game. The game follows the titular character and 3 members of his trusty crew, the Righteous Indignation, as they take on the mighty Toad Empire. Guns a-blazing. Now, like I had mentioned, this one did remind me of the Spider-Man arcade game, specifically the parts where the screen zooms out and the game turns into a shooter. The key difference here being the lack of a way to hover in the air. So I guess that means those Spider-Man sections are more like... Strider. Strider still fucking slaps. The sequel too. Never a bad pick in a Marvel vs. Capcom game either. Yeah, give Strider a shot. And that's it. That's the whole show. I'm sure most of you will probably be too deep in the Cosmic Invasion to even go close to any of these games right now, but that's alright. We have lives to live, and there are only so many hours in the day. Hell, why do you think I've covered so many beat-em-ups on this channel in the past? But if you've still got the urge to try out more games from the era, there's a wealth of great titles out there for the pummeling. I mean, what are some of your favorites? Let us know. With some civility if possible. This has been Tim from Are You OK? Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay tuned.